At one point recently, 91% of Americans have a favorable view of the Postal Service, making it the most beloved and popular federal agency. During the coronavirus pandemic, the Postal Service's value has proven greater than ever, and that's evident to every American. A June 2020 Harris poll found that the Postal Service ranked as the single most essential company to Americans during the pandemic, outranking companies that manufacture PPE and sanitizers. According to a recent Inspector General report, however, the Postal Service is not meeting the needs of every customer. In fact, the Postal Service Office of Inspector General found that the Postal Service only met service performance targets for 3 of 33 products it looked at in fiscal year 2020. Why are service performance targets important? Well, the Inspector General said missing delivery goals could result in late fees and even a drop in credit ratings for customers, as well as a disruption in cash flow for businesses. In other words, it can disrupt the economy. They added that late deliveries may drive mailers away from using the Postal Service to more nimble electronic options. And the IG added, once a consumer moves their bill payment online, they may be unlikely to go back to using the mail. I think that's a polite way of saying you lose that customer forever. Simply put, missing service standards hurts those who rely on the Postal Service and ultimately can prove to be a death spiral for the Postal Service. Despite the importance of meeting service standards in the first 3 quarters of fiscal year 2021, 3 to 5 day mail has been delivered on time only 61%. In the first 3 quarters of fiscal year 2021, magazines were delivered on time only 64%. And while service standards have improved in recent months, those improvements are likely attributable to a drastic decrease in service standard targets. So in other words, when Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General, noticed we weren't meeting targets, he lowered the targets. We're here in Chicago today because this area is among the hardest hit by substandard delivery. And because Chicago is a city with a storied postal history, Charles Lindbergh once actually flew a postal plane here in Chicago. Our history goes back to 1831 with the appointment of Chicago's first Postmaster General, an illustrious predecessor of yours, Mr. Morgan. By 1864, Chicago began at home mail delivery with the innovation of letter carriers. By the turn of the 20th century, Chicago's big businesses like Sears and Montgomery Ward relied on the post office to deliver their catalogs and advertisements that changed retail in America, paving the way for what is today a $1.6 trillion postal industry that employs 7.3 million people. In 1966, massive mail delays in Chicago prompted congressional investigations, which led in 1971 to the law creating the U.S. Postal Service as an independent establishment of the executive branch of government. Today's hearing continues a robust and important tradition of Postal Service oversight by Congress. If you look at the screen, and hopefully see something other than me, there we go. This tells you a lot of what we need to know. We need to know why in Chicago on-time delivery rates dropped 7.8% during the 3rd quarter when compared to last year's delivery rates. And this calculation does not factor in the Postal Service's reduced delivery standards. In the slide on the screen, you can see that COVID-19 was declared a public health emergency in late January 2020, but service standards did not start to plummet until July. So the idea that, well, this is all due to the pandemic is not borne out by the fact that from January through July, that is not what happened. And arguably that was the worst of the pandemic because we were in strict lockdowns. There were strict regulations, strict measures being employed to try to keep people safe. We didn't have vaccines, and yet delivery did pretty well until July. As the slide also shows, these massive drops in service in Chicago are substantial and place the city well below the national on-time average, but they're not the worst in the nation. Baltimore has the largest reduction in service standards in the country, and you can see that with that very bottom line. That's Baltimore. In quarter two of fiscal 2021, two-day mail delivery in Baltimore was on time only slightly more than half the time, and 3 to 5 day delivery was on time only 32.4%. We expect and demand more from our Postal Service. To do that, we need to provide it the resources and staffing it requires to meet customer needs. Instead, we're witnessing service delay degradation and price hikes. Postmaster General DeJoy continues to make consequential and damaging operational changes in the Postal Service that affect postal delivery nationwide. And he repeatedly has done so without conducting the data analyses or customer engagements required to ensure he's not causing unwitting damage. I've written 4 letters just this year to the Postmaster General and the Board of Governors of the Postal Service expressing grave concerns about these management decisions, fleet contracts, and conflicts of ethical concern. I am particularly concerned about his 10-year plan, which reduces service standards further and increases prices, a novel business model if successful. The Postal Regulatory Commission's advisory opinion of that plan to reduce delivery standards stated, and I quote, "It is not clear that the trade-off between financial viability and maintaining high-quality service standards is reasonable," unquote. DeJoy's actions have, I think, contributed significantly to the ability of Chicago, in deteriorating Chicago's post offices and mail deliveries in order to meet customers' needs. According to the Postal Service Office of Inspector General, 4 of Chicago's busiest post offices had difficulty grasping the scope of their own problems. If you look at the screen again, you'll see a table from a recent OIG report showing that 4 Chicago area post offices undercounted or delayed mail in their facilities by 59,752 pieces, a 95% undercount. Or, in other words, they only got 5% right. And on the next slide, you can see that these same post offices underreported non-delivered mail by a 98% rate of underreporting. In other words, they only got 2%, which is kind of stunning. These are letters and packages we're talking about from family members to celebrate holidays and birthdays and anniversaries. They're bill payments that generate late fees for those who are trying to pay on time during a pandemic, I might add. These are paychecks people rely on to keep food on the table. We cannot allow this to continue. Today, we've got witnesses who can help us define the root problems at these Chicago area postal facilities. And we have witnesses who need to be part of designing and implementing solutions. The issues plaguing Chicago, however, should not be viewed as anomalies, unfortunately. These service delays are occurring throughout the United States. We're going to work together as colleagues to solve these problems and to hopefully change the governance of the Postal Service to ensure that we have a Board of Governors and a Postmaster General who are in fact dedicated to the mission, which is delivering mail and packages on a timely and efficient basis to every household and every business in America every day. Thank you. I now call on the ranking minority member, Mr. Keller, who's on virtually. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Keller. You are now recognized for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate being able to be here today. Although it's virtual, I appreciate being able to participate. Since the founding of our republic, the United States Postal Service has been charged with one of the oldest and most important functions of the federal government. In many ways, it was the Postal Service that made the earliest states, including my home state of Pennsylvania, the second state, become united because we could communicate across the country. Americans around the country rely on the Postal Service to deliver to over 160 million delivery points 6 days a week for their medications, bills, and any other kind of correspondence. Today's hearing is meant to examine the causes of service delays and how the Postal Service plans to address them. And the premise is that service delays directly correspond to Postmaster General Louis DeJoy's tenure in 2020. Let's make it perfectly clear. The post office has had issues far before the current Postmaster General has begun his service with the post office. I'm not here to defend anyone or the Postal Service. I think there are a lot of things that need to be improved at the Postal Service since it lost $9.2 billion last year. And I know the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, Mr. Comer, and Chairwoman Maloney are working closely with the Postal Service and the Postmaster General DeJoy to craft a bipartisan solution to the problems the Postal Service is facing. However, we're having this hearing to supposedly examine the root causes of service delays at the Postal Service without actually having anyone from the Postal Service leadership explain what is being done. Republicans are focused on reforming the Postal Service, and I look forward to the suggestions that today's witnesses may have. As for the correlation between mail delays and Postmaster General DeJoy's tenure as Postmaster General, there's another thing that began in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic. Canceled mail delivery flights, upwards of 14,000 UPS or United States Postal workers calling in sick with COVID symptoms, a surge in online shopping, and a fundamental shift in the economy all pushed the Postal Service infrastructure and network to the brink. Are we going to ignore the pandemic to pretend the shift in the Postal Service was just because of Postmaster DeJoy's things he tried? Are we trying to do this just to tie it to scoring political points? That approach lacks common sense. The problems that we've seen in the Postal Service, whether it's revenue or service, have been going on before that. When it comes down to tough tasks, even in tough years like 2020, like distributing 99% of election mail on time, the Postal Service has delivered. While conspiracy theories about moving mailboxes in the middle of the night or sabotaging a presidential election using the Postal Service were being pushed by members of Congress, the men and women of the Postal Service did their jobs and they did it well. I hope this hearing will be a real conversation about the Postal Service and how they can best serve both rural regions like Pennsylvania's 12th Congressional District, as well as urban areas like Chicago. It's not the job of Congress to go to every city or town, experience a slowdown in mail, and do the Postal Service's job for them. The issues affecting Chicago mail are part of a larger, mostly systemic issues in the Postal Service. We can keep playing partisan games like demanding the Postmaster General or the Board of Governors be fired, but that isn't going to solve the problems facing people from Chicago, Pennsylvania, Illinois, or any other Americans. I'm encouraged to see the chair and the ranking member of the Oversight Committee working together with the Postmaster General to come up with real solutions to fix the Postal Service. And I hope this hearing today will contribute to that effort and not devolve into a blame game. Again, if we look at what has been going on with the Postal Service, it didn't just sort of happen overnight. They have been losing money for years. And we need to make sure that we get to real solutions that will benefit the people that work at the Postal Service and the American people that rely on it for timely delivering of services, of mail, medications, whatever anyone may choose to use the mail for. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Keller, and thank you for your opening statement. Chair now recognizes the distinguished chairwoman of the full committee, the Committee on Oversight and Reform, Chairwoman Maloney, for her opening statement. Chairwoman Maloney, welcome.
Thank you so much, Chairman Conley, for holding this important hearing.
Can we, excuse me one second, Madam Chairwoman, we want to turn your volume up.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you, Chairman Conley, for holding this important hearing, and Congressman Danny Davis for requesting the hearing. The Postal Service is one of our nation's most cherished institutions. Our dedicated postal employees deliver to 161 million locations, 6 days a week, regardless of the weather. The Postal Service binds our nation together in a way that no other institution can and ensures that millions of Americans have access to the medications and other materials they need every day. Unfortunately, as we all know well, the Postal Service's performance has been slow and often unreliable since Postmaster General DeJoy made changes last summer without testing them first and without communicating fully with employees or customers. In many of our districts, we are hearing from constituents about significant delays in the delivery of mail, medicines, food, and other supplies. These delays are especially concerning and potentially life-threatening to affect many Americans, impacting many people who rely heavily on the Postal Service for essential items. While some of these changes were reversed, delivery has remained unacceptably slow ever since, particularly in cities like Chicago and Baltimore. We understand that the pandemic has made staffing difficult for the Postal Service and that it has been facing record-breaking package volumes, particularly during last year's peak season in December. But these issues are not insurmountable, and the recent delays are unacceptable. In fact, it is the responsibility of the Postal Service and Postmaster General DeJoy in particular to find ways to overcome these difficulties and get mail delivered on time. To do this, it is critical that Postal Service leadership remember that it is not a private business, but a public service. We all want the Postal Service to be financially viable. That's why we have been working together to get the Postal Service Reform Act on the floor as soon as possible. This bipartisan bill, authored by Democrats and Republicans, would put the Postal Service on a sustainable financial footing for years to come. But allowing service to suffer while at the same time increasing prices will not increase the public's faith in the Postal Service. In fact, it might end up pushing people and businesses away from using the Postal Service. We must not allow the Postal Service to fail. It must continue providing the critical services that millions of Americans depend on. I want to thank the ranking member and the chairman for calling this hearing, and I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you again, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Maloney, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. And hopefully we can all work together to bring that bill, which passed out of our committee on a bipartisan basis, to the floor soon. Thank you again so much for being with us here today. Now to welcome us to the Windy City is our colleague, Danny Davis. Welcome, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Subcommittee Chairman Connolly, Ranking Member Kelly, members of the committee, Senator Durbin, the Illinois delegation, Postmaster Morgan, Assistant Inspector General Melinda Perez, Mr. Mac Julian. Let me begin first by thanking Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney for agreeing to hold this hearing in Chicago to examine declining delivery standards in the U.S. Postal Service. Representative Maloney has demonstrated tremendous leadership of the Oversight Committee, and it is indeed my pleasure to work with her. I also want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and your staff for coming to Chicago and for the leadership that you've provided to the Government Operations Subcommittee. Given the fact that my first full-time job was working at the Chicago Post Office for more than a year, and then working short hours for 3 or 4 years, I've always had a great deal of affinity for the U.S. Postal Service. And when I worked for that agency, the motto with the group that I worked with was, clean hands, gentle touch. Surely we owe a letter that much. The U.S. Postal Service has had a long history of excellent service in the Chicagoland area. However, during the last decade or so, there seemed to have been a continuous downward spiral in service delivery, employees' morale, and community relationships brought on by a number of contributing factors. It is my hope that this hearing will put us back on track to restore the expectations of our public, who believe that when labor groups and management are working cooperatively together with mutually shared interests and concerns, that the best of services will be the result. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Davis. And it is now a great pleasure for us to welcome the distinguished senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin.
Thank you very much, Chairman Connolly, and my special thanks to Danny Davis and Robin Kelly and all those responsible for this hearing. Mr. Chairman, it takes a pretty hot topic to bring a majority of the Illinois congressional delegation together. You've done it today. If you take a look at the numbers that have turned out here, it's an indication of what we are hearing in our offices and have heard for a long, long time. I asked my office, give me an example of someone who's contacted us about mail delivery. Well, they told me the story of June this year when we were contacted by Teamsters Local 786. They told my staff that they'd not received any mail since May 20th, weeks before, but that because of the failure of the Postal Service to provide service, their members fell out of status with their insurance due to delay or missing checks. Think of it, in the middle of a global pandemic, a critical group of frontline workers were at risk of losing their health coverage because mail didn't arrive. That is just inexcusable. So we think about the mail service, and I want to make it clear, I'm a champion of the Postal Service. I believe in them, not just because it's a constitutional authority and responsibility, but because they are good people doing good work, hard work on a regular basis. I think during the pandemic when I was down at our home in Springfield, Illinois, looking out the window for Greg to show up with the mail delivery, sometimes it was dark, 8 o'clock at night. And there he was, never missed it, every single darn day. And there are people across America who count on that letter carrier and the postal workers who bring that mail to them. It's an important part of their life. It binds them together and all of us together as a nation. Last night, my wife and I were walking back from visiting our granddaughter near Northside, around the Belmont Avenue area. 7:30 at night, I see a cart in the middle of the sidewalk. It was a delivery cart for some letter carrier, 7 o'clock at night. And I wondered what was going on. I looked, he was inside and he was feeding the mail into the slots for the people who lived in that building. These folks are working hard and they're finding it hard to keep up with some of the demands. What's it all about? Well, some of it's about COVID. COVID changed America in a lot of different ways, and I'm sure it challenged the Postal Service in terms of the health of their workers and their availability. But COVID was an opportunity for us to rely more and more on the Postal Service, and we got to keep that in mind. We're also living in a changing marketplace. Emails over letters, parcels and packages now in greater volume. My letter carrier down in Springfield said, "Senator, can you believe that today I was delivering boxes of duct tape as part of my mail delivery?" But it's just part of what I do every single day. There are some other things that are part of this. Retirement requirements. We all know that as members of Congress. That's on us. The amount of money we ask of the Postal Service out of their operating expenses to prepare for future retirements. I think it's the highest in federal government. And the question is it realistic? Did we go too far? It's time for us to answer that question. And then there are management decisions, and they've been alluded to already. I'm not a business consultant, don't pretend to be. But if someone came to my business and said, I got an idea, I'm going to reduce the value of your product, I'm going to raise its price. You'd say to yourself, you think that's a winning combination? But that's what we hear about a future management plan. We're going to reduce or going to increase the time for delivery on items in the mail, and we're going to raise the cost of mail in the process. Those two things just don't work together. It seems to me we better think hard about that. So let me close by saying it's an honor to be with you. The turnout of the delegation tells you how important this issue is. We want to work with you and the leadership in the Postal Service to make it continue to be the best in the world.
Thank you so much, Senator Durbin. And I'm reminded of the point you made about how personal the connection is between communities and their post office. When we were coming into this building, one of the gentlemen greeting us lives in Melrose Park. And he said he's lived there 60 years. He's had 3 postal delivery men, all men in this case, in those 60 years, 3. And the neighborhood has adopted every one of them. They're sick, they get well cards. It's their birthday, they get, and I mean, they're part of the community. And what other business can really point to that kind of relationship? So great point. Thank you so much, Senator. Great to have you here today. Next, we recognize another former employee of the Postal Service who's now a member of Congress, Brenda Lawrence. Brenda, you with us?
Yes, I am. I'm right here.
We're so glad to have you. You've got your 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Chairman Conley, for hosting this event, and to also Chairwoman Maloney. As the only member of Congress who worked an entire career in the United States Postal Service, I continue to be alarmed by efforts taken to undermine the service element of this great institution. Serving as a letter carrier, serving as a person who sorted mail, serving as a supervisor, serving on management leadership, doing audits of service. We took pride in every single day, every piece of mail leaving that building. And as a supervisor, as a manager, I had uniquely the responsibility and the pride of providing this service to America. But as part of Postmaster General's 10-year plan, we are seeing that he wants to lower the standards of delivery, which will transform who we are as a postal service. Last month, I led a letter with senior members of the committee requesting additional information. Why did I need additional information? Because where does lowering standards increase the productivity or the budget or the bottom line of the Postal Service? Where is it that there is a unyielding reason during COVID and everything else we went through to lower or dummy down our ability and to strike, to me, at the pride of postal workers to get the job done? We are there because of the Constitution. We are there because we are of service to the people of the United States. By undermining the agency's mission to provide prompt and efficient services, it'll do little but to chip away at the bedrock of this community, this service. As the American people, they deserve better. And just like we just heard from the senator, the question was made earlier, we should not be interfering. I don't know about you, sir, but I have been inundated with calls and demands for action. Why is my mail late? Why are my prescription drugs, my checks that I rely on, small businesses, think about that, who are now being held hostage to service standards that make no sense because they are dependent upon the Postal Service. So the question is, if we don't stand up as members of Congress who have oversight, who's going to fight for the people? I want to thank the chairman for yielding, and I look forward to this hearing today.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your leadership, Congresswoman Lawrence. We're always benefited from your experience in working in the Postal Service and understanding the nuts and bolts of the operations. Thank you so much. Chair now recognizes the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Thank you, Chair Connolly. Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney. And thank you, Danny Davis, Congressman Davis, for convening us here today. All of you know this, but the United States Postal Service is the most popular government institution in America. more than 91% of Americans rate the Postal Service very highly, according to most recent Pew polls. That's almost as high as Danny Davis's rating in this district. The Postal Service delivers 48% of the world's mail. In my district alone, the 8th District of Illinois, the Postal Service employs over 3,000 people. These are hardworking men and women dedicated to one simple principle, which is the timely and safe delivery of mail. The USPS is supposed to be completely reliable for every American, proven by the fact that the USPS even delivers mail from a sack on a mule in the Grand Canyon. I am saddened to see that the USPS has been failing to meet its service standards. I've had constituents tell my office numerous stories, including one where it took 3 weeks for an envelope to get from Evanston to Northbrook. That's only 11 miles. That's ridiculous. The onset of delayed mail can be traced to Louis DeJoy when he took over in July 2020. His reduction in service standards, especially the ones that were instituted on October 1st, just a couple weeks ago, have been a plague on the USPS, and we'll be talking about that today. That's why I introduced the DeJoy Act, delivering envelopes judiciously on time year-round to make sure that we return to the service standards that Americans deserve. But to borrow a phrase, neither snow nor heat nor gloom of night will stop us from saving the post office. And that's why we're here today. So thank you so much, Chairman Connolly, for convening us.
Thank you so much, Congressman Krishnamurthy, and thank you again for your wonderful contribution on the committee. Chair now recognizes the distinguished gentlelady from Greater Chicago, Robin Kelly.
I want to thank Chairman Conley for holding this important hearing and all the witnesses who are here today. Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, and thank you to my colleague Danny Davis for having this great idea to invite the committee out. My office, like everyone's here, has been slammed with post office casework. I don't need to tell anyone the effects of slow mail, but I have constituents who are not getting critical prescription medications on time. I have other constituents without broadband access who pay their bills by mail, being charged late fees due to the slow mail. For many, the late fees are causing financial hardship for them and their families. My district is urban, suburban, and rural, and this has been an issue for everyone. People depend on the reliability of their post office to get their medications, pay their bills, send birthday cards or letters to loved ones. Even though there have been problems leading up to the time of DeJoy, under the leadership of Postmaster DeJoy, first-class mail in my district has gone from an on-time delivery rate of 90.9% in Q2 of 2020 after the pandemic had shut everything down and before DeJoy was appointed, to a 69% on-time delivery rate according to the U.S. Postal Service. This is unacceptable. Almost 1 out of every 3 pieces of mail is not getting to my constituents on time. And it's not that the mail is a few days late. Some are taking weeks or even months to get to people. I received a Christmas card in February. I never worked for the post office, but my mom retired from the post office, and my brother is a postal worker now. So this is personal to me also. I hope we can have a productive hearing today and find solutions so my constituents can stop worrying about missing their prescriptions and their bills. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Kelly, and thank you for your service on our committee as well. Chair recognizes the distinguished gentleman from the great state of Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first of all, thank you for agreeing to bring the subcommittee to Chicago, and thank you, your staff, for working with my office to put this hearing together. There are issues all across the country, but the subcommittee decided to come to Chicago, and we're forever grateful. I also want to thank our witnesses for being here today and the work that you do on an ongoing basis. But we have work to do. The problems are numerous. In Chicago, there are about 100 mail routes across the city going undelivered daily. It's been as high as 150. Mail theft, random post office closures, delayed mail carrier start times, and slow casework, just to name a few. Unfortunately, about 75% of the first-class mail in my district is getting delivered on time. These have these problems have consequences for Chicagoans who rely upon USPS to deliver their mail. Now, I get it. I've been doing public service in one manner or another since about 1980. The problems have existed on an ongoing basis, but I do think they've been made worse by the measures that the postmaster has put in place. The notion of decreasing standards while increasing prices defies business logic. It's really a disservice to the American people. And I understand that these problems can't be solved by USPS alone. We have seen remarkably slow progress made by USPS to try to address them all. It's simply unacceptable. So that brings us to today. I look forward to learning why the problems in Chicago have been so persistent and what actions will be taken to resolve them quickly and permanently. And thank you again, Mr. Chairman. We appreciate your being here.
Mr. Quigley, thank you so much, and thank you to you and your staff, as well as Mr. Davis and his staff, have really helped us along with the courthouse staff here in Chicago. So thank you so much for making this possible. We really appreciate it. Chair now recognizes the distinguished member of the Illinois delegation, Congressman Bobby Rush, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairwoman Maloney, who was my friend since we were both elected together in '93. And I certainly want to thank my colleague, Congressman Danny Davis, for all the work that he's done on this issue. And Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the opportunity to weigh on this subcommittee for this vital bill hearing. You don't know, my constituents are celebrating your arrival, and they're celebrating this hearing. Mr. Chairman, missing mail, along with delayed and inconsistent delivery, have persistently plagued my constituents. This poor service has had real impacts. It's resulted in missing bills that are overdue, lost medication, and trouble checking other vital documents and packages. And as you stated, Mr. Chairman, these issues, while worsened by the coronavirus, predate the onset of the public health emergencies and point to a wider systemic neglect by the Postal Service. This is why, after hosting a town hall meeting in July of 2020 with over 3,500 of my constituents, I requested that the U.S. Office of Inspector General audit 4 stations in my district that were the subject of a high volume of complaints to my district. I'm so glad that this report served as part of the impetus for today's hearing, and I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. Furthermore, Mr. Chairman,
without objection, so ordered.
yes, furthermore, Mr. Chairman, due to the rapid neglect of my constituents and concern and failing to rectify this situation in a timely manner, I single-handedly call for the termination of the Chicago Postmaster General, Wanda Prater. I was pleased that the USPS heeded my call for new leadership here in Chicago, and that Ms. Porter was ultimately transferred to another state. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to this frank discussion today, and I'm eager to continue working with all of today's distinguished witnesses who are also my friends to help at long last raise the standard of Chicago's mail delivery to where it should be. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rush. The chair now recognizes the distinguished gentlelady from the great state of Illinois, Ms. Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, for her 2-minute opening statement.
So, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for convening this hearing. Thank you, Danny Davis, for helping to make this happen. Yes, it's true that for years, residents of the 9th Congressional District of Illinois have faced significant mail delivery delays at times. But over the last year, my district office has opened thousands, yes, thousands of cases with the Postal Service for only 4 Chicago neighborhoods: Uptown, Rogers Park, I'm gonna take this off, Rogers Park, Northtown, and Edgewater. My staff has also worked on many other cases, including those in Evanston and Skokie and Arlington Heights and everything in between. We must not forget that each one of these cases represents real people who rely on the Postal Service to ensure that they are going to receive their bills, their Social Security checks, and their life-saving medicine. Unfortunately, under the leadership of Postmaster DeJoy, what we have seen is a beloved agency that has become mired in corruption and mismanagement. Earlier this week, just this week, over 200 residents from my district wrote postcards. This is just an example of the over 200 postcards that were written. Some people said, one person said, we often go 3 to 5 days without any mail whatsoever. Some pieces are never delivered at all. Another person wrote, why does it take so long to receive mail these days? I hope that today's hearing will find the answers to these questions and, more importantly, the solutions to the problem. Our residents and our letter carriers deserve better. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Jan. Thank you for your leadership as well. Chair now recognizes the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Bill Foster, Congressman Bill Foster, who I believe is on screen. Bill?
Virtual. Yep, audible and visible here.
Great. You're recognized for your 2-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Congressman Bill Foster. I'm a scientist and businessman, and I'm proud to represent the 11th Congressional District of Illinois, a district that contains Aurora, Joliet, and Naperville, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th largest cities of Illinois. I want to thank the Committee on Oversight and Reform for holding this hearing today, and especially thank my colleague, Chairman Connolly, for leading the fight to resolve these mail delivery inadequacies in the Chicagoland area and around the country. The Postal Service is critical for many Americans, including the people that I serve in the 11th District. Unfortunately, on-time delivery rates have declined significantly between July and December 2020 to a low of 67% at the end of December 2020, and they remain inadequate today. This decline has had a very tangible impact, and every member of Congress has been hearing about it. These lapses in service mean late medications, difficulties for small businesses that rely on the Postal Service, and a level of inconvenience and uncertainty for our constituents that's simply unacceptable. As our economy finally gets up off the couch and gets moving again after the pandemic, there are going to be sore muscles and snafus and bottlenecks. We get that. But the Postal Delivery Service should be a source of strength and certainty in our economy and our lives, and not just an additional source of uncertainty. So as we examine the dramatic drops in Postal Delivery Service standards in today's hearings, I want to make it clear that members of Congress need and expect a realistic plan from the Postmaster in advance of the coming peak season that addresses the issues we're going to be discussing here. We need to tackle these problems now before the situation becomes more difficult, and that's why I'm glad we're all here today. I look forward to hearing from and working with you to improve delivery times and the overall quality of service from the U.S. Postal Service. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Perfect timing, Mr. Foster. And thank you for also reminding us, as bad as the problems are right now, we are coming up in peak season. So it could get a lot worse given the volume we're facing. Thank you for reminding us of that. Chair now recognizes a distinguished gentleman from the great state of Illinois, Mr. Brad Schneider, who's also on screen, for his 2-minute opening remarks. Brad.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Connolly, I'm so grateful that you are hosting this hearing on a critically important issue and doing it in our great city of Chicago. I want to also thank our witnesses for speaking on the current state of the Postal Service and particularly how the Chicagoland area has been affected by changes in postal operations, drop in service standards, and mail delays. As Senator Durbin noted, it doesn't take a business consultant to know that lowering service value while increasing service price is not a formula for success. I'm a huge advocate for the United States Postal Service. Unlike Congress, the Postal Service is held in very high regard by all Americans, and every American fairly expects quality, timely service with rising service standards. Unfortunately, over the past year, we have experienced the opposite. Since Louis DeJoy took over as Postmaster General in July of 2020, the Postal Service has experienced dramatic drops in delivery service performance, and this hearing today is being held in Chicago because the circumstances are even more dire in our community. In my district, Illinois' 10th district, which is located just north of this hearing facility, we felt the effects of DeJoy's changes in mail delays even before the data started rolling in. The drop in service standards has had real impact on my constituents, and my heart breaks every time I talk to someone who shares that they aren't getting their medication to treat a chronic condition on time, or that their bills are arriving sometimes months late, leading to late fees, cessation of services, or lowering of their credit rating. Or the Social Security recipient who says her check hasn't arrived, forcing her to delay the payment of her bills and other real financial stress. Since 1970, the Postal Service has been a critical, independent federal agency that has ensured that mail reaches every address in our nation. During the pandemic, all of us experienced just how essential the Postal Service was and is to our everyday lives. And that is why I've called on DeJoy time and again on behalf of my constituents and our nation as a whole to fix the operational changes that clearly aren't working to address mail delays. And it's also why I've been and will remain an advocate for funding our Postal Service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Snyder. Chair recognizes a distinguished gentleman who represents my old stomping grounds when I was in college in DuPage County, the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Caston, for his opening 2-minute remarks.
Thank you to Chair Connolly, or as we refer to him, the pride of the 6th District, for organizing this hearing and allowing me to participate. The Postal Service provides an absolutely critical function to this nation, especially in this moment, with seniors relying on the Postal Service for Social Security checks, folks for prescriptions, families right now for the child tax credit checks that are going out. And yet, for the last year in the 6th District of Illinois, the calls that have come in from my constituents have had a strong kind of Mark Antony vibe. They have not called to praise the Postal Service. We've received calls from members asking our office to help them figure out how to get out from under penalties that they are being charged for bills that are unpaid but they never received. We're getting calls from families asking how to get the economic impact payments that we structured to get them to help recover from COVID that they never received but were counting on for their finances. I got one call from a 64-year-old woman who had waited 3 weeks to get critical prescription drugs in a panic. We've gotten a whole lot of other calls from folks who have not received their medicines at all. I had one family who reached out because their birth certificate was lost in the mail as they were renewing their passport and was wondering how they are going to be able to identify themselves going over and if somebody else is going to use their identity. One call is a fluke, 2 is a coincidence, 3 is a pattern, and we've gotten a lot more than 3 calls. Now, the service degradations that we've seen just from that sample have not correlated with the weather. They've not correlated with periods of increased demand. And as you point out well, Mr. Chairman, they seem to be nationwide. This is a problem that's driven from the top, and I would submit to you that it's been deliberately imposed by Postmaster Louis DeJoy to weaken and ultimately privatize the post office. He's more or less said so about as openly as you can. The OIG report details how DeJoy's efforts this past year and a half to close processing facilities, remove sorting machines, restrict carrier movements have strained our mail system from the top down, and of course the October 1st service standard reduction, which will slow down our mail system even more at a time when everything else in society is getting faster. I know that the post office is filled with dedicated, hardworking individuals who want to do a good job, but when there's a problem at the top, the buck has to stop at the top. I commend the letter carriers, the mail handlers for doubling down in spite of these operational challenges through rain, sleet, and snow. Our country relies on the U.S. Postal Service, and it's imperative we have a working system with a postmaster general who actually believes in improving the system, not degrading it, especially in this moment when reliable, affordable mail is a necessity for millions. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Caston. Chair now recognizes a distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Jesus Chuy Garcia, Congressman Garcia, for his 2-minute opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this important meeting. And as my colleagues have noted, the Postal Service is a lifeline to our constituents. At its best, it is an equalizing institution that ensures critical packages like medication, Social Security checks, and important paperwork are delivered to every doorstep in the U.S. But unfortunately, in the neighborhoods I represent, people's experience has been very different from that ideal. For long before I came to Congress, I heard concerns about mail service and delivery in my district and across the Chicagoland area. And since I became congressman, I've continued to hear messages loud and clear that my constituents are waiting unacceptable periods of time to get their mail. In some instances, they're not getting mail at all. All of this was before the selection of Louis DeJoy as Postmaster General. His changes, as demonstrated in USPS OIG reports, made a situation worse. As we know from the reports, on-time delivery rates plummeted, and this at the same time as mail delivery became all the more critical for service that people had previously sought out in person. Constituent complaints accelerated, like the one from a small business that shifted away from mail payment after delivery proved too unreliable, or a constituent whose bank canceled her credit cards after she didn't receive them, or an elderly couple, one of whom is bedridden and dependent on mail delivery for critical medication. In all, we received thousands of constituent complaints, over 100 which we filed formal complaints with USPS. And look, I still believe in the power of the post office. It's got the potential to keep us together and connected, even as the pandemic continues to keep us apart. But in order for it to fulfill that incredible potential, the mail's got to get delivered. And I'm committed to working with postal leadership, union representatives, and congressional colleagues to make that ideal a reality. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Garcia. The chair now recognizes the distinguished gentlewoman from the great state of Illinois, Lauren Underwood, for her 2-minute opening remark.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm so delighted to be here today because the drastic drop in delivery standards that Illinois has seen under Postmaster General DeJoy's leadership is unacceptable. I know we'll hear a lot today about how Chicago has been affected, but I also want you to hear what this has meant for rural and suburban communities like mine, where we are incredibly reliant on USPS. Since Mr. DeJoy became Postmaster General, postal casework in my office has quadrupled. Small businesses have been hobbled by slow and unreliable delivery. Families separated by the pandemic have been missing opportunities to connect. Holiday cards were delivered late or not at all, and passports have taken weeks to arrive after they were mailed. All because of policies from the previous administration and Postmaster General DeJoy that are undermining our postal service. Let me be clear. This attack on USPS is an attack on seniors, veterans, and small businesses across the country. It's an attack on frontline workers who have worked harder than ever during the pandemic and on economic prosperity for Black Americans who comprise almost a quarter of USPS employees. It's an attack on voting access as more of us safely and securely cast our ballots by mail. I see an all too familiar pattern in these attacks. Regrettably, there are those operating in our political system who want to dismantle and privatize much of the government. A great way to do that is to degrade our most popular and impactful government services until we are so understandably frustrated that we look elsewhere. Senator Durbin described Postmaster General DeJoy's plan as designed to sink the Postal Service, not save it, and sadly, I think he's right. That's why today's hearing is so important, and I look forward to working with my colleagues here to conduct oversight and pass legislation to protect, strengthen, and modernize the Postal Service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Underwood, and unbelievably precise timing. Great,
Sir.
great job. And last but not least, Chair is happy to recognize the distinguished Congresswoman from the great state of Illinois, Marie Newman, for her 2-minute opening remarks.
Good morning and thank you, Chairman. Good to see everybody, and so pleased to be here to talk with everyone. I want to thank our witnesses for being here, and I also just want to make the statement that I'm so proud of our postal union workers and all workers throughout the postal systems. We stand with you, behind you, always. As everyone in the room already knows, the primary function of the USPS is to deliver mail on time to residents every day except Sunday. Frankly, Chairman, I am disappointed to say that on Chicago's southwest side, that has not been our reality. And in fact, it's been the exact opposite. I represent Illinois' 3rd District, which is home to over 700,000 residents that all rely on mail to receive their checks, pay their bills, access their medication, and communicate with loved ones. Between the months of March and May of this year, my district was home to 3 of the top 25 worst performing offices in the country. Chairman, I have been in office for less than a year, and in that amount of time, our office has received nearly 500 constituent complaints on postal delays, lost mail, or other delivery issues. And in Chicago, there's been an exceptionally poor job in recruiting and maintaining carriers, although I believe that that's getting slightly better, which is only further exacerbated by the pandemic. And we realize there is a pandemic here, to be clear. It is crucial we work to hire more carriers right away. I also want to be clear that these service delay issues represent an economic divide that historically and largely affects our Black and brown neighborhoods. Our low to moderate income communities lack access to financial technologies that allow them to pay for their bills electronically. Therefore, they rely on the Postal Service all that more. So, Mr. Chairman, when mail doesn't arrive on time, it may very well stand in the way of my constituents having food to eat, roof over their head, and paying their bills. And as a former small business owners, I hear from them every day and have great empathy. I know that our local entrepreneurs rely on the Postal Service to deliver their products every day. So when the mail doesn't arrive on time, it may well mean the difference between an opened or shuttered business. Let's be clear. This issue comes from the top down at the United States Postal Service. And today, I look forward to demanding answers from them, because when mail isn't delivered on time, we fail our small businesses, our most vulnerable communities, our seniors, our veterans, everyone. And I just want to make one additional comment about the shuttering of sorting machines. That is one of the key reasons we're having trouble recruiting carriers, because when you shut down 30% of the sorting machines in one state, as we have in Illinois, it really affects all of our workers. And it also affects management, to be clear. They've had a really rough time of that as well. So I just want to be clear that that is a problem. And I yield back. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And let me just say, I want to thank all my colleagues for being so disciplined in trying to keep to time limits. We were able to get through all the opening statements in 1 hour. I also think it's an extraordinary thing that there are 13 members from the state of Illinois alone, plus others of us not from Illinois, who are participating in today's hearing. That's a profound statement about the level of interest, the level of concern, and the commitment of these men and women who represent Illinois proudly in the United States Congress to improving postal service to all of our constituents. So thank you all for being here today. I'd now like to introduce our 3 witnesses, and thank you for your patience. But I think it's instructive and important for you to hear the concerns of members of Congress. Our first witness today is Eddie Morgan, Jr., Chicago Postmaster from the U.S. Postal Service. Then we'll hear from Melinda Perez, Deputy Assistant Inspector General for the Audit, U.S. Postal Service Office of Inspector General. And finally, we'll hear from Mac Julian, Union Representative for the National Association of Letter Carriers. And actually, I think more than union representative, you're a regional You're the regional head of the letter carriers here. Yeah, and national trustee. Thank you. The witnesses, if you would rise and be unmuted so that we can swear you in. It is the custom of our committee and subcommittee to swear in all witnesses. If you would raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that all three of our witnesses answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You may be seated. Without objection, your written comments will be entered fully into the record. We would now ask that you summarize your testimony in a 5-minute time slot. And first to go is you, Mr. Morgan. Welcome.
I'm sorry, I see it. All right. Good morning, Chairman Connolly, members of the subcommittee and Illinois delegation. Thank you for calling this important hearing to examine service performance in Chicago. My name is Eddie Morgan Jr., and since June, I have served as acting executive postmaster of Chicago, where I oversee service to 1.3 million delivery addresses. I have nearly 24 years of service as a postal employee and served 4 years in the United States Air Force. Several factors have led to the current instability of the Chicago Post Office workforce and service. Street crime, including frequent assaults, robberies, and 2 carriers being shot, has raised understandable fear, leading to deficiencies in recruiting and retaining workforce. We have additionally faced problems with retention between the time applicants accept a job and the time they complete the 4-day carrier academy. Pandemic-related leave and other employee availability issues have further hampered the ability to achieve and maintain service excellence. While we have seen an improvement in attendance since the expiration of the emergency federal employee leave benefit, we continue to struggle with commitments from our new hires and even some career employees who refuse to deliver in certain zones within the city of Chicago due to violent crime. Though our level of authorized positions is appropriate to the daily workload and on some days surpasses the need, daily employee availability challenges our ability to achieve consistent on-time delivery. Chicago City Carrier employee availability began steadily improving from April through August. Working within our collective bargaining agreements, we have taken appropriate progressive administrative actions for individuals with high unscheduled absences. We are also in the process of filling 27 vacant station manager and supervisor positions. I have also taken the following steps to enhance training and build the skill sets of local leadership teams: establishing daily cadence calls with senior operating managers, holding supervisor summer school to develop our leaders who handle the day-to-day oversight of our craft employees, holding in-person trainings with any new internal dashboard is launched, and supporting peer-to-peer coaching. Since my arrival in June, we have hired 243 city carrier assistants and postal support employees. By the end of the year, we are projecting to hire 180 additional carrier assistants and 68 postal support employees. In September, we adjusted letter carrier start times to align with mail availability and provide increased and more reliable service. This change was based on analysis of when mail was arriving at each unit, and start times were individually adjusted in accordance with those arrival times. On average, start times were adjusted by 30 to 45 minutes. Before the adjustments, carriers were reporting to the office before the last dispatch arrived from mail processing plants for delivery. At no fault of their own, they simply had no work to perform during this waiting period. I want to stress that a later start time does not equate to later delivery times. Since implementation, we have seen carriers returning from their routes at the same time of day they did previously while providing more consistent delivery to our customers. Other steps I have taken to improve service and customer experience include hiring a contracted team to improve internal and external facility maintenance until we are able to fill 17 custodial vacancies, establishing a retail customer experience recognition program to reinforce national goals and expectations, mandating that employees wear uniforms to maintain the brand and reinforce public trust, reestablishing consumer advisory councils to connect customers with their local office. 3 councils are currently in place, and we hope to expand to at least 1 for each alderman's area. And I have also mandated contacting customers within 2 hours of receiving an inquiry to gather any additional information needed to resolve their concern. While I have only served the city of Chicago for a short time, please know I am committed to providing high quality, reliable service to our residents. We have seen service performance improvement over the last 8 weeks as a result of the processes we have established, and we will continue to refine those processes as any new challenges arise. Thank you, Chairman Connolly, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to address these matters. I welcome any questions that you or members of the Illinois delegation have.
Wow, you had 11 more seconds. Good job. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today, Mr. Morgan. Ms. Perez.
Good morning, Chairman Connolly, Ranking Member Heiss, members of the subcommittee, and the Illinois delegation. Thank you for inviting...
Excuse me, is your mic on?
Yes, sir.
Can you pull it closer? It's a little hard.
Can you hear me better now?
Much better, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me here today to discuss our work related to the Postal Service's operational changes and service performance. The mission of the OIG is to ensure the efficiency, accountability, and integrity of our nation's Postal Service through independent oversight under the authority of the Inspector General Act of 1978. We take our mission very seriously. For a long time, Chicago has experienced delays in mail delivery. Last year, the issues intensified, and members of Congress expressed concern about deteriorating mail service. In response, we visited several Chicago post offices to analyze the extent of the problem and see what was causing the service failures. During our visits, we observed mail and parcels that had been sitting for up to 19 days without being delivered. This was driven in part by not having enough employees to fully cover all carrier routes, a challenge that increased for Chicago, along with the rest of the country, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We also found the full extent of these delays was not evident in internal postal data systems because they were not reported properly. Accurate data may have allowed postal management to more proactively address these issues. In addition, during an earlier audit, we found delivery delays were sometimes the result of difficulties that occurred prior to the mail arriving at the post office. Issues with mail processing and transportation led to mail being sent to post offices late or not fully sorted for the carriers, which in turn increased the risk of mail not being delivered on time. As a result of our observations and findings, we made several recommendations to help the Postal Service address these issues. To help postal stakeholders more easily find service information, we recently deployed a new service performance website that shows how Chicago and the rest of the country performed over time. Service scores for Chicago were generally worse than the national average, and most of the first-class mail scores in Chicago this year have been lower than they were in previous years. Looking at the recent data reported for April through June 2020, Chicago had the second worst service score of all the postal districts for two-day letter mail. Specifically, the Postal Service only delivered around 82% of this mail on time compared to the national average of just over 90%. However, this 82% score marks an improvement over the preceding quarter, and this recent positive trend in service was seen across almost all of Chicago's service scores. We will continue to monitor this trend as the Postal Service releases new service performance information. Though things seem to be improving, we recognize the importance of timely mail delivery across the country and have a body of work focused on this topic. For example, in the fall of 2020, we issued reports on how the Postal Service's implementation of operational changes across the country impacted service. We found that the operational changes, on top of employee absences due to COVID, negatively impacted the quality and timeliness of mail delivery. More recently, we looked at nationwide service performance and identified the most common root causes behind service failures. These included insufficient capacity to handle the increase in parcels, sending parcels to the wrong facility, staffing shortages, and mail not being fully sorted when it arrived at the post office. The Postal Service has plans to address these concerns. However, implementing multiple initiatives to correct these issues will be challenging, especially now as the Postal Service is entering the holiday peak season. Timely mail delivery will continue to be a focus of our work. This work is vital to ensuring the American public has an efficient postal service. We will soon release a report on the Postal Service's readiness for the upcoming holiday season. Another project will assess how the Postal Service manages its delivery operations with a focus on undelivered routes. In a third project, we will be reviewing the 10 lowest performing mail processing plants, which include 2 in Greater Chicago. We will look at multiple data sources to determine what is causing their poor performance and what solutions should be considered. We understand that getting mail on time is critical to everyone. We look forward to continuing to work with you to evaluate service concerns in Chicago as well as the rest of the country. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our work. I am happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Perez, and thank you. You had 19 seconds more to go. And we're going to be very interested in those 10 you're going to be looking at, and hopefully you'll stay in close touch with us on the subcommittee, given our interest and this level of interest all around the country. It now gives me great pleasure to recognize Mr. Julian for his 5-minute opening remarks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Connolly, Ranking Member Jody Heiss, and to all the other members of the Subcommittee on Government Operations, the Illinois delegation, and of course, Senator Durbin. I thank you for the opportunity to be here today on behalf of the 4,500 members of the National Association of Letter Carriers, local branch number 11, located in Chicago. Like other craft employees at the Chicago Post Office, mail handlers, clerks, and custodians, ours is a very proud, hardworking, and dedicated workforce. We believe in the mission of which we were sworn, and that is to move and deliver the mail of the United States Postal Service. Unfortunately, the reason we are here today is to discuss the crisis that has befallen the Chicago Post Office, a crisis that was not born of the recent pandemic or the questionable policies of the current Postmaster General, but rather was years in the making and only exacerbated by COVID-19. In order to get a clearer picture of the current state of the Chicago Post Office, I will frame my testimony with a passage from Title 39 of the U.S. Code, Postal Policy. A, the United States Postal Service shall be operated as a basic and fundamental service provided to the people by the government of the United States, authorized by the Constitution, created by act of Congress, and supported by the people. It goes on to say, it shall provide prompt, reliable, and efficient services to patrons in all areas and shall render postal service to all communities. B, the Postal Service shall provide a maximum degree of effective and regular postal services to rural areas, communities, and small towns where post offices are not self-sustaining. The Chicago Post Office today resembles nothing of the aforementioned postal policy, yet it is consistent with the report of the Office of Inspector General dated May 13, 2019 on the Graceland Annex. The audit was done at the request of Congressman Mike Quigley. This report identified late arriving and unsorted mail, falsified scans to stop the clock on packages, the underreporting of delayed mail, the mismanagement or insufficient supervision of employees' work hours, all of which can be attributed to the staffing issues noted in this report. Like other offices in Chicago, this postal unit lacks the number of employees needed to provide prompt, reliable, and efficient services to postal patrons. Of course, this was pre-pandemic. Fast forward to February 1 of this year, and the OIG conducts another audit at the request of Congressman Bobby Rush. This time, it was 4 units on the south side of Chicago. The results are eerily similar. Delayed mail, improper scanning, inaccurate reporting of mail conditions, and below par employee availability directly related to staffing. These stations are not anomalies, but rather the status quo of the Chicago Post Office. As recent as August of this year, an average of 100 to 200 full and or partial routes were not getting delivered in Chicago daily. Each route accounts for up to 1,000 delivery points. These reports of delayed mail are based on a firsthand account of carriers on the workroom floor, because as noted by the OIG, postal management data is consistently unreliable. They no longer manage operations to provide the maximum degree of effective and regular mail service. They are managing to provide misleading reports to appease upper postal management. These same reports are then given to the congressional offices seeking answers to constant complaints by your constituents. We know their complaints because we are postal customers too. The understaffing and mismanagement of the Chicago Post Office have taken a toll on our dedicated workforce, and letter carriers are tired. We are tired and we are embarrassed. We are tired from working multiple assignments late into the night because despite the OIG reports, local management has failed to properly staff the operations for which it has been entrusted. We are tired of monitoring our check stubs due to the rampant time card fraud by Chicago postal supervisors. We are tired of the disrespect on the workroom floor that is shown to postal workers who have worked this past year through a deadly pandemic, yet there's total disregard for our personal safety. Letter carriers and clerks are the face of this organization, and we are embarrassed by what the Postal Service has become. Our members come to work every day in a uniform that represents a tainted product because the Chicago Post Office is in utter disarray. Although recent reports provided to congressional offices by this union indicate improvement in some delivery areas, we are of the belief that this is not sustainable. From the flawed onboarding process, training, and retention of new hires, to the erratic and unpredictable daily operations, the Chicago Post Office is dysfunctional at best. Although the OIG reports provided detailed recommendations to improve service, nothing changed because there is no real accountability. We hope that this hearing today will move us towards that accountability and improve the service to our customers. Thank you, and I am prepared to answer any questions that you have for us.
Thank you so much, Mr. Julian. We're now going to go into direct questioning by members. I'm going to ask all of my colleagues to follow the same discipline you've shown in opening statements. Everyone gets 5 minutes. I'm going to have to be fairly strict because we have 17 members who are going to be exercising their right to ask questions. So we're going to have to move along smartly, and I would ask our witnesses to try to be concise in their answers as well. Chair now calls on the distinguished chairwoman of the full committee, Chairwoman Carolyn Maloney, for her 5 minutes of questioning. Chairwoman Maloney.
Thank you so much, Chairman Conley and Danny Davis, for calling for it, and all my colleagues from Illinois. What an incredible show of support and caring for the post office. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. We appreciate all that you do for the Postal Service and the American people. As we have already heard this morning, the Postal Service has not been living up to its responsibilities to deliver mail on time. And for many, this is not merely an inconvenience, but a life-threatening concern when medications are delivered late or are lost entirely. It is obvious that mail is not being delivered on time, yet in many cases it is unclear how long mail is taking to be delivered in different locations. That is why the Postal Service Reform Act includes a provision to require the Postal Service to provide weekly updates on service performance on a public-facing website. Mr. Morgan, would increased transparency about where mail is not being delivered on time help you better target areas that need additional attention and resources so that we could improve mail delivery? Mr. Morgan.
Thank you for the question, Representative. I do have increased transparency. We have new dashboards, and those dashboards provide live data.
Mr. Morgan, can I interrupt 1 second? Madam, would you just bring that closer so we can hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Is it better?
great.
Awesome. Yes, yes, ma'am. We do have reports currently that helps us stay transparent. Our dashboards are live, meaning our letter carriers carry a scanner with them that feeds back live information that is critical information that helps us understand when we could possibly have a delay. We have those reports coupled with office visits and audits to help us.
So when you see that there are delays, do you assign more personnel? How do you address the delays?
When we learn of a delay, we shift our flexible workforce. So from the surrounding offices in the city, we move the available workforce to fill the gap.
Thank you. I also believe more oversight from the Postal Regulatory Commission is needed over the Postal Service and pricing changes the Postal Service is implementing. I plan to introduce a bill that would strengthen the Commission's oversight over the Postal Service. In particular, if the Postal Service tried to make a change without fully testing it, as DeJoy did, the commission would be able to request additional information before issuing an advisory opinion. The bill would also require a 2/3 vote of the Postal Service Board of Governors to implement a change if the commission determines it did not have enough testing to prove that it will benefit the American public. Mr. Julian, would increased checks on the Postal Service be helpful to ensure the Postal Services only makes changes to their prices and services after they have gathered sufficient evidence that it's in the best interest of the American people? Mr. Julian.
Yes, thank you. I believe increased oversight at every level of the Postal Service can only help improve performance. Looking specifically at the Chicago Post Office, and the OIG reported that the problem that they had was that a lot of the information, the transparency that Mr. Morgan just referred to, was indeed absent. In fact, their ability to accurately document mail that's not being delivered is a big problem in the Chicago Post Office.
Okay, and Mr. Julian, what resources and support do you and your letter carriers need to get the job done on time?
Right now, we blatantly need more carriers out there on the street. Using the postmaster's own metric in a recent correspondence where he stated that they were fully staffed to the extent of having 4,000 letter carriers in the Chicago Post Office. Our records indicate the number is more like 3,500. So their ability to move resources as needed is limited. And we know that there are many offices. In fact, I provide reports daily or at least weekly to the Chicago delegation on mail that is not being delivered. And as recent as yesterday, we still see close to 100 full or partial routes not being delivered, but it's also not documented by postal management.
Okay, so the American people deserve better from the Postal Service. I look forward to working with you to ensure that we turn this situation around and get mail delivered on time. My time has expired and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, and we look forward to working with you on this latest bill with respect to the PRC. Our acting ranking member, Mr. Keller, is recognized for his 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Keller.
Thank you, Representative Connolly. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I just have a couple of questions. Mr. Morgan, first, thank you for your service, and I say that to all of our postal employees. I really appreciate the work that you do on behalf of the American people. Mr. Morgan, you've been 24 years with the Postal Service, and you've, as I see your biography and what I'm looking at, you've been in Kansas City, you've been the Arizona District, so you've been to many areas in the Postal Service. And then you mentioned about things that you were doing here in Chicago. Some of the things you're implementing here, have you done that throughout your career in the Postal Service when you were at different locations working on customer service?
Yes, sir, I have.
So does the Postal Service do benchmarking to see which locations have higher rates of customer satisfaction and implement those policies across the board where other post offices might not be reaching that level of customer service?
Yes, we have benchmarks, we have reports, and we do know where we have concerns and issues, and we do utilize the processes that are working around the country, and we share that information to provide better service and world-class service to the American public.
A question, because you mentioned in your testimony that you had employees that came in and the mail hadn't arrived yet, so they were, and no fault of their own, I'm not faulting them, but then you adjusted some of those times. Had you done that previously in your experience working at other locations, made some of those adjustments?
Yes, sir, I have.
Over the 24 years?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the things that we're looking at to deal with customer service don't lead back to Postmaster DeJoy. It leads back to a bigger issue where these things aren't being implemented across the board, because you just got to Chicago being there 24 years and having done some of these same things. It seems like we really need to have a clear path forward on how we address these issues because, as you mentioned, you came in earlier this year and implemented these things that might have been done at other locations, in some cases, years in advance.
What I would say, sir, is that I can't speak for what happens on a national level. I came here, I was asked to come to Chicago to help improve service. Upon my arrival, I analyzed what was going on. You are correct, I have 24 years of service and I enjoy my work. I love providing service to the American people. There was one glaring issue that stood out amongst all of the data, and it was our employee availability. And so when you talk about our start times, let's speak about that. Our start times was misaligned. The mail arrives at a set time, and if we're not starting at that right time, we're wasting work hours. By adjusting the work hours to the workload or the work need, we gain more hours. Every letter carrier, every postal employee has a maximum of 12 hours that they can work. So I'll give an example. If we start at 7 o'clock, the mail arrives at 9 o'clock, and the carriers are on the clock at 7, we've lost 2 hours, or we've lost the ability to deliver mail. By adjusting the start time, improved our delivery.
Yeah, if I could ask a question. So that start time that you're talking about, how many years had they been starting at the same time with the mail arriving later? I mean, is that something that just changed recently, or had that been going on for a period of time? How long before you arrived had that been going on?
Sir, I can't answer about what they've done in the past. I just know this is what, when I came in after analyzing the data, this is what I learned, and then that's what we moved to start to address.
And did you do similar things like that at other locations over your career with the post office?
Yes, I have.
So, because I've heard a lot of people talk about how the Postal Service's performance metrics are a result of what Postmaster DeJoy has done, and that clearly is not the case. If for 24 years you've had to come into places and improve the customer service, it certainly, to me, leads to a bigger issue of the Postal Service implementing the best practices at all locations to ensure that there's on-time service. I mean, so looking at this, I would say that you're adjusting the start times. The postmaster, does the postmaster tell the different mail facilities, whether it's in Chicago or Detroit, what time they have to start their employee staff, or control that, or is that up to the person at each location?
Are you asking if Mr. DeJoy instructed me to change the start times? Is that what you're saying? Or does he instruct us?
What I'm saying is, does he set the start times? Does he set the start times, or does he allow the managers at each area to manage the postal sector? I mean, I guess the point I'm making, and I'll just be blunt with it, the point I'm making is these problems existed before Postmaster DeJoy came in. And like with any big organization, it takes time to get things going in the right direction. And you're doing that. And
Well,
I compliment you for that. But wouldn't that be an accurate statement that a lot of these problems
the
exist?
gentleman's time has expired, but Mr. Morgan may answer.
What I can say is I can't speak of nationally, but locally, I can tell you that I've been a postmaster here in Chicago, Kansas City, I've been Arizona, Michigan, and I set the start times according to the data everywhere. No one gives me that direct instruction. That's in my purview or my authority to set those times. And that's
Thank you,
what I
Mr.
did.
Morgan, and thank you, Mr. Keller.
I just want to follow up with that because it's an important
Mr.
thing
Keller,
to say.
you-
Everybody's
Mr.
trying
Keller,
to-
you-
no, Mr. Connolly, everybody's trying to blame the postmaster.
Mr. Keller,
We get
your point, and your time has expired. Mr.
Your
Keller,
time has
your
expired.
time has expired. Mr. Julian,
Because people don't want to hear it.
no, we heard it loud and clear. In fact, maybe you could listen for a minute. Mr. Julian, Mr. Keller is trying to make the point that all of this problem began long before Mr. DeJoy, and he has virtually nothing to do with it. In fact, he's solving problems. Now, before I call on Mr. Davis for his 5 minutes, I got to say, maybe I'm suffering amnesia. Let's take overtime. We're in a pandemic, and a lot of members got sick. Some sadly died. That meant we had to do something, either hire more people or allow more overtime so the job got done. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And who sets overtime policy?
Well, the overtime policy is set by our collective bargaining agreement.
Yes, but did Mr. DeJoy, when he became Postmaster General, actually halt overtime when he took over in July?
I believe that there were some directions given to postal management, but we
By the
strictly adhere-
Postmaster General, which had a direct impact on quality of service. And secondly, again, maybe I've got amnesia. Weren't there, in fact, opinions that were issued by federal judges to roll back Mr. DeJoy's so-called reforms because they were injurious to Postal Service, and they cited that it was directly political, that it was aimed at affecting an election that was pending in November of 2020. Is that not the case?
There were some judges' decisions.
Yes. I
on that,
just wanted
yes.
to make sure for the record I got that right. Thank you. Mr. Davis is recognized for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again for bringing this hearing to Chicago. I thank all of the witnesses for your testimony. Mr. Julian, let me ask you, you mentioned that poor staffing was a key reason for the long-standing, meaning long period of time, degradation of service in Chicago. I understand that the service hired 243 city carrier assistants and other support employees to address the shortage. What was the letter carrier's position relative to that action?
Well, basically, we felt, and we still feel basically, our position has been that the staffing has been inadequate prior to the pandemic, during the pandemic, and even now. By their own admission, in the most recent meeting we had with them, they stated that they were at least 500 carriers short, or it was their objective to hire 500 additional carriers in the upcoming months.
Have they given any reasons why they have not been able to hire?
I don't know if it's just the inability, the lack of people ready in the workforce, but what we're seeing is poor onboarding process that have people who have been told that they were being hired by the post office not being brought on. The training is wholly inactive, inaccurate, and unacceptable. We're seeing those who are not properly trained put out on the streets before their time. And because of that, they're having a problem with the retention.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Perez, in your testimony, you highlight operational changes made across the country, as well as COVID, as causes for absences and for some workforce participation. And I've heard this morning that maybe paid family leave might also be. And as a hard-nosed, staunch supporter of paid family leave, could you share what you really came up with as the causes for absence, that employees were not coming to work?
As far as the employee absences, as noted, the low employee availability hit Chicago particularly hard. With regards to the post office that we had looked at, the 4 post offices here in the Chicago area, what they did is then they prioritized the delivery of the mail and with the employees that they did have available. And so the fundamental procedures that the Postal Service has, they didn't always have the time to address, for example, scanning of packages or reporting the delayed mail. So as far as, again, the employee availability, I would say that it is as a result of the pandemic, the leave that was offered to the employees through the different acts that were passed.
And they were having problems before there was a federal paid family leave program.
Yes, sir. Chicago, as we noted, has been one of the, I would say, lowest performing locations across the country for quite some time. And again, we do have ongoing work, not only looking at delivery issues, but as I mentioned in my opening statement, looking at some of the lower performing processing facilities to determine whether or not there's additional challenges upstream of the delivery units that we can hopefully identify and provide recommendations that the Postal Service can address.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The distinguished Congresswoman from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence, is recognized for her 5 minutes of questioning. Ms. Lawrence.
Thank you so much. Mr. Morgan, I want to just emphasize in your statement why the need for leadership from the top is needed. You can't cherry pick across the country with particular leadership and every manager going in setting their own agenda. And one of the things that we hear is that this plan is supposed to lower the standards. And I hear your passionate commitment to improving the standards, but we have a Postmaster General who on the record want to lower the delivery standards, and we're hearing the outcry from the community. I want to ask Ms. Perez, you are responsible to look at and make recommendations for the Postal Service for their accountability and their overall effectiveness. What can the Inspector General do in providing oversight or accountability for this 10-year plan? And I wanted to add something to that. When the Postal Service does not adhere to the recommendations of the IG, what happens then? So if you, as you had outlined all these issues, and Michigan has been one that has been subject to audits and recommendations are being made, but I don't see them being followed by this current Postmaster General. What is the proper oversight to ensure that not so we don't have to hire 100 Morgans to go around and try to figure it out on their own and set standards and change deliveries processes and start times, which that should be a national standard. So where is your power and what do we need to do to ensure that we're living up to what the expectation of the Postal Service is?
Sure. To answer your first question with regards to the oversight of the 10-year plan, Delivering for America, we have identified several audits that we will be soon launching or have recently launched that will look at different initiatives that the Postal Service has identified. And we'll be providing robust oversight and watching those initiatives closely. One particular audit that we recently announced is looking at the aggregate of the plan with regards to the underlying assumptions in the 10-year plan, as well as how the Postal Service will implement and measure performance. To answer your second question with regards to when we make recommendations, we have a robust process with regards to the Postal Service being required to provide us with support and evidence with regards to the measures that they've taken to implement the recommendations. And we do not close recommendations until we're satisfied that the intent of the recommendations have been implemented.
Do you report to Congress when your recommendations are not followed, or you see in the reports that they're not implementing the change that you're recommending?
Yes, ma'am, we do. Through our semi-annual report to Congress, we do call attention to the recommendations that have not been implemented.
So again, I wish I had someone here from the Board of Governors or from the leadership of the Postal Service. But if we implement this 10-year plan and lowering the standards, all these issues that were brought up by the National Association of Letter Carriers, by Mr. Morgan, who's a postmaster, how is that going to improve the delivery? It doesn't improve it. That's what's so staggering about that. The plan does not improve the service that all of us as members of Congress are hearing from the public. So you're saying that if you're supposed to get a 4-year degree and you refuse to get it, let's reduce it down to 2 years, and then you'll be eligible for a 4-year degree. It is mind-boggling to me that the leadership
And we'll
of one
charge
of
you
the
more for it.
greatest organization is continuing to lower the standards. I thank you, and I yield back.
And Ms. Lawrence, forgive me for interrupting, but I was just adding to your point about lowering that standard from a 4-year degree to a 2-year degree, and we'll charge you more for it.
Exactly. In addition to that,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the dots, they're just not connecting.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Distinguished Congresswoman from the great state of Illinois, Robin Kelly, is recognized for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you again, Chairman Conley, for holding this hearing, and thank you to all the witnesses for taking the time to be here today. Postmaster Morgan, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, on-time delivery for my district is down almost 20% since Postmaster DeJoy took over USPS. We have reports of mail being marked as delivered when they were not, and mail taking months to deliver, and just different things you've heard today. And I understand you have not been overseeing the Chicago Post Office for all of this time, but what do you attribute to the delivery being down 20%? And I know you said you put in changes, and how long do you think it'll take to improve the mail delivery? And let me just get my other question to you, and what can we do? What more can we do to help you and actually other postmasters around the country implement the OIG's recommendations? So what help can we give you?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. When you ask, I want to make sure I understand it. Basically, why are there delays in your region? Part of my analysis, I wanted to know that answer as well. Why? And so you look at, I'll use an example. If there's 40 assignments in a building, and I have 60 employees scheduled there, I look at that and I believe that I'm properly staffed and should be able to carry out the mission. What I learned was I have the staffing on record. I have the staffing. So if that building has 40 carriers, I have 60. So to say that I have a staffing problem would mean that I only have 20. That's not the case. I have the employees on the rolls. We have an attendance problem. So that is where my focus is addressing those unscheduled absences. What I would like Congress to do is to assist us, continue to assist us with your networks, with our job fairs, our hiring, and also supporting the Delivering for America plan.
So it sounds like you attribute it to not really having the staff that supposedly you are supposed to have, and also there's an attendance problem with the staff you do have.
The staff, I don't say that we have a staffing problem.
Oh, you don't? Okay.
We do not have a staffing
It's the
problem. We
attendance
have an
problem.
attendance
Okay.
problem, and therefore it's hard to deliver the mail when those that I have already hired, trained, and expect to come to work do not.
Okay, thank you. I do want to shift to how labor shortage, or, well, I'll get Mr. Julian's take on it, is affecting the post office. Obviously, we've seen a nationwide labor shortage and have been cited as a reason for slower mail delivery as postal staff is being stretched thin. And we do have job fairs, and we did have the post office there. Mr. Julian, as a union rep of the National Association of Letter Carriers, can you discuss how this has impacted letter carriers and post office, and what is your comment about the attendance issue?
Well, let me just say, like Postmaster Morgan here, I've been a letter carrier for 24 years myself. And when I started as a letter carrier, there was a sense of urgency in getting the mail delivered. We delivered everything, everywhere, every day. As one manager told me, we do not warehouse mail, we deliver mail. That's not the same mindset in the post office right now. The rules of our collective bargaining agreement in the workplace has not changed in 24 years. If people don't come to work, you discipline them, you get more carriers. That is a reality that's not happening in the Chicago Post Office. He may be correct that their roles reflect that they have enough carriers, but as the OIG pointed out, they don't keep up with their roles. They have people on the rolls who no longer work for the Postal Service. They've been firing people recently who have already quit the post office in an effort to clean up their roles. There is a definite staffing issue in Chicago. And the most important metric we have to look at is not how much time we're saving in the office, but whether we're getting the mail delivered. That is our objective, delivering the mail. That's not the objective of the current Chicago Post Office. Not how much time we're saving in the office, but whether their customers are getting their mail. And you know what your constituents are saying. They are not lying. They're not getting their mail.
And what would you say about the morale of people that work in the post office?
The morale right now, I would have to say, is pretty much at an all-time low, and it's directly related to the start time. You have carriers doing everything they can with a short work staff who have worked through a pandemic, who are trying desperately to get the mail delivered. And now you've compressed their hours of operation by shortening their day. Yes, we have 12 hours to deliver the mail, but if you don't have enough carriers to get it done, it won't get done. It's not so much that the mail is arriving late. It is the process. It is not getting the mail to the station on time. And they're managing to the problem as opposed to fixing the problem in terms of getting the mail to the station earlier. Then we can keep our same starting time and provide efficient service.
Thank you.
My time's up.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kelly. And if I might follow up on a point you made, did I understand you to say, Mr. Julian, that the OIG found that one of the attendance problems is that we're still showing here in Chicago people holding jobs who in fact are no longer holding those jobs?
I believe that was in the initial report that I cited.
Is that correct, Ms. Perez? Can somebody help with this mic? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Oh, there we go. It is correct. We did find that in our February 2021 report that employees that were no longer with the Postal Service and not showing up to work were not being removed from the rolls. However, as I mentioned earlier, when we closed recommendations, we're provided evidence from the Postal Service with regards to actions taken. So as of March 2021, we did receive some evidence that they had removed some employees from the rolls, but we haven't done additional work in that regard since then.
Mr. Morgan, do you want to comment on that? Because this is something you inherited, presumably. That seems like a fairly simple problem to fix. You said it's not a staffing problem, it's an attendance problem. Well, if I'm a staff member who's left or quit, presumably, you're right, my attendance is not perfect because I'm no longer working there. Have we fixed that problem?
That is being addressed.
Addressed.
That is being addressed, correct.
That's a historical present tense.
Okay, so let me explain. What I inherited is, I'll use an example of 35, let's call it 3,700 carriers. We have an attrition rate, so those that worked with us and resigned, unlike, we have a collective bargaining agreement, so we have to take them off the rolls a particular way. That being said, those numbers are minute, very minimal. The staff that we have, as we're improving, since my arrival, we're just about 13% of you go up, and those employees are coming back. So those aren't employees that were on the rolls and they quit. Those were employees that had attendance issues that we are addressing, and they are now back to work, and it's reflective in the service.
Which is a different issue.
That's addressing the staffing.
No, I mean, that's not people who left and
correct. Correct. Those are who are on the roll but are not coming to work.
Great. Okay, thank you. The distinguished vice chair of the Government Operations Subcommittee, the Congresswoman from California, Katie Porter, is recognized for her 5 minutes of questioning. Ms. Porter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for convening this important hearing. Ms. Perez, your office, the Office of the Inspector General, released an audit of the Postal Service in September of this year. And basically, they graded the U.S. Postal Service on its ability to deliver mail on time. And the audit found that by the spring of 2020, mail delivery was right around 92%. That is, about 92% of the mail got there within the standard of on time. That dropped to 80% by the fall of 2020, and by January of 2021 was hovering at around 61%. I realize this has gone up somewhat since then, but I wanted to ask you, when did Mr. DeJoy take over as postmaster? Do you know?
The summer of 2020.
The summer of 2020, so June of 2020. And what happened after he took over? Did the rate of on-time mail delivery go up or down?
Went down.
And I'm a professor, and I used to do a lot of grading. And 92% is considered widely like an A minus. 80 is considered hanging on to the lowest possible B. 60% is at best a D minus. The Postal Service delivers 48% of the world's mail. It is an institution, it is a civic treasure, and we let it get all the way. What you found is we let it get all the way to that D minus level. How, in your opinion, did this happen?
So yes, last summer when the postmaster arrived, he had implemented several measures and operational changes along with 57 additional initiatives that were implemented by the postal executives. And it was in order to improve service as well as ensure financial stability. And as we all know, those initiatives were rolled back a few months after that and prior to the 2020 general election. But one of the things we had found with regards to the rollout of those operational changes as well as the rollback was that there was inconsistent communication amongst the Postal Service employees. So it lent to having issues and challenges with regards to consistent implementation of those initiatives across the board and across the country.
So to summarize, after Postmaster DeJoy took over, he began to make changes, and what followed from those changes was this precipitous decline. And what we ended up with was postal delivery that was borderline failing because we had a postmaster who, in my opinion, I'm not saying you said this, but in my opinion, was failing and continues to fail today. I wanted to ask you about something else that you, in your testimony, which is your office talked about employee availability. Why weren't postal facilities prepared to manage their workload when workers went on paid leave?
That's a good question. I respect that question. As far as, why wasn't the Postal Service prepared for it? I think that would be better asked of the Postal Service. When we do go out to different facilities or delivery units, we do analyze the postal data to determine what employee availability is like as far as percentages of employees that are available to conduct their jobs and process and transport and deliver the mail. But it is definitely one of the causes as things had exacerbated during the COVID-19 pandemic as far as the hindering the Postal Service's ability to deliver the mail on time.
I mean, it seems to me that postal workers are going to they're going to get sick. They're going to have family members who get sick. They're going to have children. They're going to have medical issues, and that we ought to be planning for this paid leave. One of the recommendations you made is to increase employee engagement, try to retain these workers. And I think that paid leave is one of the tools we have to maintain people's connection to their workplace as they go through these transitions. Mr. Morgan, I just wanted to turn to you for 1 second. This is a map of service delivery standards based on mailing things from my area, the Santa Ana area. I am hard pressed to understand why it is almost faster for me to walk my mail halfway across the country than it is to deliver it through the Postal Service.
The gentlelady's time has expired, but Mr. Morgan may respond to the question.
I am not aware of the Congresswoman's area, so I can't answer that.
Is it fast? Well, I'll yield back, but I just want to say that it takes 8 days to deliver mail from Santa Ana to Portland, Oregon. And I'm not that fast of a walker. I'm not in that good a shape. I could walk there in 13 days. So you're You're not even having the walk time with postal delivery. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Porter. Your time has expired. Mr. Krishnamurthy, you are recognized for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Julian, in your testimony, you said, "We are tired of the disrespect on the workroom floor." What are you referring to?
Well, it is well known within the Postal Service that there is, in some workplaces, a healthy level of hostility on the workplace when you're trying to get more out of less, when you don't have enough employees and you're making unreasonable demands of those who are at work every day.
And have you brought this to the attention of the management of the USPS?
This indeed has been brought to their attention. In fact, I believe we still have a task force in place on a national level dealing with the hostility on the workroom floor.
I think that in an interview with WGN earlier this year, you said, "We had staffing issues prior to COVID." And so is it fair to say that you were understaffed at USPS prior to the pandemic?
Yes, it's fair to say that. And in fact, I believe the complaints that you get from your constituents predate the pandemic. And a lot of them will say that the troubles that they had, in fact, the town hall meetings, a lot of them that we were involved in with Congressman Davis and with Congressman Rush were pre-pandemic. And they had the same issues at that time.
Very good. Ms. Perez, in your testimony, you say that 2 of the lowest performing mail processing plants in the country are in Greater Chicago. So 20% of the lowest processing plants in the country are in Chicago, correct?
That is correct, according to the Postal Service data that we analyzed.
And you also said that Chicago, on page 2 of your testimony, Chicago had the second worst service score of all the postal districts in the country for 2-day letter mail. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
I have a poster board with me which illustrates what we're dealing with here in the Chicago area and the country. And so basically what this illustrates is the change in postal delivery standards. Before October 1, if you were in my zip code, 60193, before, right here, you could expect to send a piece of mail by first-class mail, basically in the Great Lakes region, certainly including the Chicago area, and have it reach in 2 days. That's this light blue area. And then the rest of the country was 3 days. Isn't that what this is showing?
Correct.
And today, if you look at what was implemented on October 1st, that same 2-day service standard area has shrunk to Chicagoland and part of Wisconsin. Is that right?
Yes.
And then the part of the country that is 3-day has now gone to this region of the country, basically the eastern seaboard and the Great Plains, and then the rest is 4 and 5 days. Isn't that right?
Correct.
So why is it the case that when a constituent comes to me and says that a piece of mail was sent from Northbrook, Illinois, which is in the greater Chicago area, to another part of the Chicago area, namely Evanston, it took 3 weeks? How could that be?
So again, as we noted in several of our audit reports, it's oftentimes that there are challenges that are faced by the Postal Service with regards to whether it's at the delivery unit, but it could also be at the processing center or within the transportation.
Could it be that because we have some of the worst performing plants in the country and some of the lowest service scores in the country, that it's only logical that we would have some of the lowest delivery standards in the country?
So yes, we'll be looking at those 2 plants that we mentioned and that I mentioned in my opening statement.
And now we're going into the holiday season.
Correct.
Where we're about to see a tons and tons and tons of parcels and pieces of mail and holiday cards go through this very system. And here we have a Postal Service that's not ready to handle it. And so what I'm trying to get at, Mr. Julian, is do you think that we're ready for this holiday season?
No, we're not.
Well, thanks for your candor. Now tell us what needs to be done to get ready for the holiday season right now? Because I know a lot of families are really hoping for a little bit more normal of a holiday season in terms of postal delivery.
To get ready for the holiday season, this holiday season?
Yes, sir.
It should have started this summer. I mean, right now, we're on path to get ready for Easter. When you're talking about bringing people on board and properly trained to deliver the mail, it's time, it takes time. So that's why the staffing issue was important prior to the pandemic, because once the pandemic hit, we were already exposed, or we were already in a place that we were not going to be able to handle it, like we're not going to be able to handle the upcoming holiday season if we're not properly staffed.
We're not ready.
We're not ready.
Thank you, Mr. Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnamurti. Your time has expired. Chair now recognizes Mr. Quigley for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Perez, you talked about the mail not being fully sorted before it gets to the carriers. Why is that the case? What is not happening?
So oftentimes we find at the processing center, as I mentioned, they may also have employee availability issues or other, procedural things that they're not following at the processing center, and they often deploy the mail down to the delivery unit without it being sorted in what's called carrier sequence.
And they're told that's okay, your understanding?
My understanding.
Out of procedure, right?
Correct. That is out of procedure. My understanding is based on the location of the country and the availability of the staff at the delivery unit. They may have the time to sort the mail into carrier sequence, or they may not. So I do believe it's a case-by-case basis across the country.
Well, let me ask Mr. Morgan, what's the case here in Chicago? The question had to do with the mail not being fully sorted before it gets to the carriers.
The letter carriers receive their mail in various forms. Since my arrival, do we have a challenge here and there? Yes. Do we have a problem? No. But I would like to go back for a quick second. And I want to ensure that everyone understands, from my perspective as the postmaster of the city of Chicago, I am ready for peak season. I ask that our employees that are on the rolls, please come to work. We are staffed. We have the available staff.
Sir, I want to get to that, but I want to stay on this stream.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying you think there's a problem, but it's being addressed?
No, I'm saying that, no, that's not what I'm saying. I can't speak nationally. What I can speak about is in Chicago.
That's all I'm asking.
So to say that does the mail come 100% prepared every single time? No. Is there a problem? No, there is not.
Sir, same question.
There has to be a problem if you're moving back to starting times because you're not getting the mail to the stations in a timely manner.
But are they, to your understanding, is the mail getting to the carriers not fully sorted?
Is getting to the carriers not fully sorted, and in fact, there's a lot of carriers on the workroom floor who are doing clerk work because there are not enough clerks in these offices as well.
Very good. Mr. Morgan, back to you. So there is at least some issue with the mail being fully sorted before it gets to the carriers. You're changing the whole structure of the management, and I get it. You're moving things back because you don't want people sitting around for 2 hours because the mail's not getting there on time. But to your understanding, what has to happen to get to the original point that the mail gets to the carriers that 2 hours earlier? You're delaying everything, and it's going to get dark sooner because it's not getting to you on time, and it's not being, at least in some cases, fully sorted. So you're managing around the problem at the beginning, which is what I think our gentleman from the union is trying to tell us. Can't we sort out the initial problem so you don't have to manage around it?
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm making sure it was on. Let me state, again, as an example, there's always going to be a first and someone's always going to be last. Someone's going to receive their mail first at 4 a.m. and there's going to be a unit that may receive their mail last at 9 o'clock. Formerly, Chicago was a district of its own. We're now, all of the area is now one district. The start time alignment has nothing to do it had everything to do with when the mail is available. So the trip, someone's going to get it first. So if the truck arrives at 4 o'clock.
Let me respectfully stop you. If you got the mail at the beginning of the day on time, you wouldn't have to manage around it. which pushes everything back and to that person at the end who gets it in the dark. And I'm here to tell you, most of the members will say when things get delivered later, it's more likely that there'll be mistakes. But we also hear from carriers that they don't like delivering in the dark. They feel less safe, and it's more difficult to do the job. So back to the original question. If we could solve that 2 hours at the beginning and the issue that has been raised about the not being fully sorted, you wouldn't have to manage around it. I know you want to defend the Postal Service, and I know you're doing a good job. You're doing the best you can. But you got to describe it warts and all, sir. Back, if we could solve that problem, where you get that mail and it's properly sorted 2 hours before, you wouldn't have to manage around it, right?
I'm not managing around it now.
But it's supposed to get there 2 hours earlier.
It's not. That's a misunderstanding. That is not supposed to get there 2 hours early. Every facility has a mail arrival profile and a set time that the mail arrives. I changed the start times here to match the workload when the mail arrived.
And my time's up.
Gentleman's
You're managing
time.
around the original sin.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Chair now recognizes Mr. Rush for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this has been quite a hearing. Ms. Perez, I want to thank you for your timely completion of the audit that I requested that you knew in August of 2020. And confirmed the glaring issues around mail deliveries that were also clear to my constituents. The audit found that nearly 60,000 delayed mail pieces was not reported to the customer service daily reporting system. And I was more concerned to learn that the Henry McGee and Ashburn stations did not report any, not one, delayed piece of mail, despite having over 10,000 delayed mail pieces between them. So my question, how does this underrepresenting, how does this underreporting rather, and lack of transparency around mail delays impact the ability of customers, and particularly low-income Chicagoans, to reliably track and receive vital items that they desperately need? No.
Okay. So when the mail is not accurately reported, it doesn't allow postal management to be able to adjust fire and implement mitigating factors to be able to address that, so that constituents can get their mail timely.
Right. Mr. Julian, you and I have had many hours and hours of intense conversations about the mail delivery. And I am interested in the national systemic issues that the U.S. Postal Service is confronted with, the DeJoy issues, but grandmamas, elderly people in my district, they don't want to hear DeJoy excuses. And you and I have talked over the years about basic leadership. And that was my most strongest disagreement with Ms. Prater. She just did not provide the adequate leadership. And so, and my dear brother, I just want you to know that I'm looking at leadership, not excuses. I'm looking at, if there's a problem, then let's work together to solve the problem. I'm looking at veracity, people who will be upfront, straightforward, tell my constituents the problem. They're very intelligent. They can understand it, but they don't want to be lied to. Work with them and let's solve these particular problems. So, Mac, I'm just going to ask you, you got your friend there, has there been a leadership change that you can pinpoint since Ms. Prater's departure?
Well, upon the departure of Ms. Prater, we still have the same district manager. In fact, the OIG report was addressed direct to the district manager, Randy Stein, and he failed to address those issues. We have been willing to and open to working with the new postmaster. We told him that from day one. He may be put in a position to fail and not even realize that. I know we've had 3 area vice presidents in the last year, and the last of which has refused to meet with us. So we're trying to work with them. We've compromised on some of the workplace issues. We expedited the bidding process. We created multi-unit assignments months ago, and some of them, they still have not assigned employees to these assignments.
Well, I also want to ask Mr. Morgan, since this attendance problem was a clear example of what I was concerned about. If you got people who don't show up for a job consistently, then you're on the farm. What prevents you from firing people who don't show up?
Nothing prevents, right? What I would say is we have to do better on our side of the table and training our leaders to properly address that. We have a collective bargaining agreement. So when it's time to address attendance issue, there's a process. And even if the individual is guilty by their actions, and if there's a gap in the process, the individual is retained because of a flaw in the process. So my responsibility is to train up my staff so they can properly address and know how to handle those cases when they're presented.
Fire the people who don't show up for work.
Addressing those who are unregular in attendance, correct.
Thank you.
Irregular in attendance, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. And I would also add, just listening to Mr. Julian say that there's a regional vice president who won't meet with union reps. Is that correct?
The latest area vice president, I believe he's been in his position for approximately 2 months now, Eric Henry, and we have made multiple requests to meet with him because we're not getting results from the district manager.
Does that fall within your purview of responsibility, Mr. Morgan?
No, it does not.
It does not. Okay, well,
The area vice president is over here.
Right, right. So I know that's going to concern every member of this delegation to learn of that, and if we can be helpful in facilitating that, let us know. The distinguished gentlelady from the great state of Illinois, Jan Schakowsky, is recognized for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, I have to stay local because we have a couple of real problems in my congressional district. I have a bunch of post offices, but just 2 of them, the Rogers Park and Northtown, have consistently, we've had town hall meetings. We have 200 postcards from the 50th Ward just last week. I can't understand why these post offices have been so consistently bad and why we continue to have these delivery problems, which are really serious. I mean, I hear about medication that isn't delivered, small businesses that are in real trouble because they aren't getting. So can you somehow explain to me, and by the way, you mentioned the criminal behavior in some of the communities. This is not true of these particular post office neighborhoods. What's the deal? And why can't we, after a long time, and particularly in this last year when we have literally thousands of complaints, that we can't deal with this? How do you explain that this happens in just these communities?
I can't explain how it happened. One, I wasn't here. What I can say is, since my arrival, what I have done is, again, we've hired additional staff to get to cap. I want to make sure so it's not that I'm contradicting myself. We continue to hire to address the attrition. Those who come on board, go through the Carrier Academy, choose not to keep the assignment, and different things. What we have to do on the management side, I'll talk about the management side, we have to do better understanding our job. My staff is extremely new. We've attrited. We've had a lot of senior leadership retire out, and now we have new leadership. So I have to bring them up to speed so they know how to properly run the facility, to do better running the facility and giving instructions.
Well, let me ask you, Mr. Julian, as someone who's on the street all the time, how do we quickly address problems when there are particular problem areas like we are seeing in my congressional district? What can we do?
Well, first and foremost, we have to acknowledge that there are problems that exist. I believe in the 12-step program, the first step is admitting that there is a problem. We've had meetings with the postmaster. The same reports that your office has received, he has stated that he do not believe those reports, that they are inaccurate. You get the complaints from your customers. You tell me, are those reports accurate or not? I've invited him to meet me on any workroom floor and to see if mail was not being delivered. We have yet to meet on the workroom floor. But I understand recently he has been on several workroom floors, and he has seen for himself that mail is not being delivered, that mail was being hidden in the cage in Cicero. You were there recently, that he have had to walk some managers and supervisors off the workroom floor because they are still falsifying information, stopping scans, stopping the clock on packages. You hear this from your customers, your constituents all the time, that a package was scanned, delivered, or attempted, and they were at home. There was no delivery, or were there an attempt?
Oh, some of my constituents are told it was delivered,
Yeah.
even though it wasn't delivered.
I'm a customer and I go on the internet and I'm waiting on a package and it says it's delivered. I expect it to be at my home. The reality of it is it's not right now because they're still falsifying data. Let's be honest, no one is trying to put the Postal Service down here. I think there's no greater love for the Postal Service than us who work for the Postal Service. We know that when we're at the top of our game, we're the best at what we do. We deliver for FedEx, we deliver for Amazon, we deliver for UPS. They come to us because we are the best. Right now in Chicago, we're not the best, but we can be the best. But we have to have an honest assessment of the problem and be willing to work towards fixing it. We're willing to work with them towards fixing this problem.
Well, and I want to work with you to make sure that we can clean it up in my community. And if I have a minute, I don't know if I do still. Am I out of time? Oh, okay. I just want to again, ask Postmaster Morgan, I would like to just close with this question by asking that you provide Congress with a plan and a timetable for addressing the issues that are highlighted by the Inspector General's report. Can we get a timeline and a report on how we're going to solve these problems in the Chicago area?
You're asking for a response to the OIG report. Am I understanding you correctly?
The gentlelady's time has expired, but Mr. Morgan may respond.
I believe that we did have a response, but I will get with our government affairs team and I'll provide an official answer for the record.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Distinguished gentlelady from the great state of Illinois, Ms. Lauren Underwood, is recognized for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us here today. Today, we've heard about unacceptable declines in service nationwide and specifically here in Chicago. But I also want to highlight what it means for the rural communities like the ones in my district, where USPS is often the provider of last mile delivery. Ms. Perez, has the Office of the Inspector General, or USPS itself, analyzed how the recent declines in service levels has specifically impacted rural communities?
We do have some ongoing work looking at that, and I believe it'll be issued later this fall.
Okay, so going forward, has USPS developed a strategy to ensure that rural communities are not disproportionately impacted by reductions in service standards or other changes laid out in the Postal Service's 10-year plan?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information readily available, but I'm happy to provide it to you after the hearing.
For the record.
Sure.
Okay. As part of the consolidation of district offices, USPS plans to combine the Chicago district with other parts of northern Illinois. Ms. Perez, as is the case with most regions, the Postal Service is a major employer, a source of good-paying union jobs. Has there been an analysis of how this consolidation will impact the postal workforce in northern Illinois?
I can't speak to that. I'm not sure.
Will you get back to us for the record?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Postmaster General DeJoy's 10-year plan involves raising prices while also cutting services. Ostensibly, the goal here is to save money, but this could have a major impact on small businesses operating on tight margins and could even drive more customers away from the Postal Service. Accelerating the reduction in demand for U.S. mail could harm the long-term financial health and stability of the Postal Service. Ms. Perez, has there been any analysis or modeling of the impact these price increases or lowering of service standards could have on consumer demand for first-class mail?
So with regards to the 10-year plan Delivering for America, we personally have not done any analysis of the plan as of yet. We do have an ongoing audit looking at the underlying assumptions of the plan, as well as how the Postal Service will monitor implementation. And of course, with regards to the changes outlined in the plan, we'll be monitoring that going forward as well.
And then who would do the analysis of that plan?
So we would do independent oversight and our own analysis to determine whether or not there's recommendations we can make with regards to the implementation of different initiatives with regards to the plan. But as far as whether or not the Postal Service did any independent analysis of their own, you would have to ask that to the Postal Service.
Okay, and Mr. Morgan, are you aware of that type of analysis?
No, I am not. That's a national issue, so that would have to be directed to headquarters.
Okay, and Mr. Morgan, in your role as the Chicago Postmaster, I assume that you work closely with other postmasters across the region?
I have conversations with them, but my purview is strictly the city of Chicago.
Okay, and so in those conversations, do you address service delivery times or any kind of bottlenecks that you're seeing within the larger Chicagoland region among service delivery times?
If I have an issue that pertains to Chicago, yes, we absolutely address it.
Okay, so in terms of your supervision then, are you all held to a larger, regional standard around, can you just talk about any kind of lines of communication or formal practices between the Chicago Postmaster region and where I represent, right, which is the suburbs and rural areas outside the city?
No, so you have to understand the structure. So the rural area they have their own independent
Correct.
postmaster.
That's
so
right. We
in
work
their
with them.
areas,
Mhm.
they receive their mail from our processing plants. So we all receive our mail from the processing plants. So we
Right.
do come together daily, and if there's, as you said, a bottleneck, we have that conversation. If the mail is stuck here, or if there's an availability issue, or whatever may arise, we
That's
get
right.
together and then we fix it. Yes.
And then during your tenure, I understand that you're newer in this role.
am.
Yes. Can you give us some metrics that you've seen regarding the processing times leading to bottlenecks in the larger service delivery area?
Metrics? No, I can't. I can't particularly give you metrics, but I can provide some for the record.
Okay. But USPS does track those things.
I can give you our service numbers. Yes, I can have those submitted. And I'm pretty sure we also gave service numbers in my written testimony.
Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Ms. Newman.
Thank you.
In whose district I intend to visit tonight and tomorrow. Welcome, and you are recognized for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and please have a good time. It's the best district, really. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Mac, for being here. I appreciate it so much. Mr. Morgan, I really appreciate you've had a hard job since you came in, and we recognize that. And thank you for working with me on the Mount Greenwood and some of the Illinois 3 postal issues. You were very helpful, and we did bring delays down, so I want to commend you for that. Mac, I'm going to go back to a comment you made. It was really concerning to me. You said something about postal supervisor fraud, and that's a big word. So let's talk about that.
It's a big word, but it's rampant. It's a reality.
Okay.
It
What does that
contributes-
exact? Can you define it?
It
what you're saying?
contributes to some of the low morale in the workplace. When we're talking, I think it was recently reported about the instances of management stealing time, time clock fraud. This is an effort to show that we're getting more work done in a less amount of hours. It has been something rampant in the Chicago Post Office for the past few years, to the extent that a grievance settlement, we had 3 letter carriers working full-time. No, we need letter carriers on the street working full-time to audit the clock rings of supervisors, yet they were still shaving hours, knowing that they're being watched, shaving hours off the carrier's time. Recently, we had a grievance settlement, roughly about $500,000 paid out to letter carriers across Chicago because they were still in time. This is over and above the time that they had to restore back to them. It is a reality.
Mr. Morgan, I'd like to hear your side of that.
Absolutely. One, that what we're speaking of is a past audit of grievance, if you will, and that what there was a team done, and my understanding is that there was fraud, and that was being addressed. It was wrongdoing. Now, upon my arrival, I did learn of the team, and again, I can't fix the past, but all I can do is to start to put things in place and then address it going forward. Now, in our line of work, I'm managing people. So depending on what people do is my response. So that we are taught, we are trained to do the right thing. Should someone's behavior veer the wrong way, then it is addressed. And that, the tax audit or grievance that we're speaking of, that was, I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Mac, 19, I believe, 2018, 19, and currently it was closed out. Our latest sweep found no flaws. That was the most recent, but that was a review of the past, and that was found, and that was the grievance was sustained.
Okay, thank you. And then would you respond to that, Mac? Are there any new cases?
Yeah, it was closed out as a matter of settlement. But one thing that we can say, as far as accountability, those supervisors are still on the workroom floor. So you have an opportunity to address them and their habits and what they've done. They are still in the workplace.
Okay. A couple more questions during my time here. So recruiting, staffing, and training, kind of hard all over the place and just hard in regular times as I've run organizations. So can you estimate, Mr. Morgan, what level of productivity increase we might have if we brought back those 30% of the sorting machines that were taken away by DeJoy a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whatever it was?
No, I can't. That's logistics, and that's not my area of expertise.
I would like an answer to that. So if there's a way for your team to identify how much more productivity we might be able to receive if in fact those sorting machines were reinstalled that were taken out, we'd appreciate that for the record, and it'd be helpful to us.
I'll take that back to our government relations team, and I'll see if we
Would
can
the
get you a
gentle
response.
lady yield without prejudice to her time?
Sure.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, just to follow up on that, you have sorting machines.
No, I do not. I am the postmaster of Chicago. The sorting machines are inside of our mail processing plants. That is not my authority.
Okay.
I do not have any machines.
Are you familiar with sorting machines?
I am.
And what, on a daily basis, can one sorting machine process? How many pieces of mail?
Thousands.
Thousands.
Jerry, I believe it's close to 30,000 actually.
Correct.
Yeah.
That would depend on the machine. There's we have multiple machines, and there are some that kick out.
That's
30.
correct. But my point would be, you would certainly concede, even though it doesn't fall within your purview right now, that Ms. Newman's point, the withdrawal of machines clearly would have an impact on volume of mail being sorted and thus ultimately delivered.
I wouldn't concur with that without analyzing the data, looking at everything. Those machines will run on its own. It needs volume to process. It needs people to process. So I couldn't say that, hey, we bring those back, because I would have to look at the entire picture to make that determination.
So at least would you not intellectually concede that in theory, the withdrawal of a number of machines beyond the normal maintenance schedule could have an impact on delivery schedules?
Again, that's a very big ask.
Chairman, if I may answer
Yes,
because I do know this.
Thank you for yielding.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for yielding back. Because I have experience with USPS as management consultant, I can tell you the answer is yes. I just don't have the exact number, but the answer is definitely yes.
So again, this is what I would say, and this would just be an example. If I am in the plant and I have 1 million pieces of mail, and that's just for an example, it takes 2 machines, and I got rid of 2 machines because I already have 2 to do that work, I would have excess. So why would I run excess when what I have can do the job that's needed? Now, I can't debate what's national and what's in each district. I'm just saying that's what I would look at. I'm looking at an entire picture. I wouldn't universally just jump I would analyze and then make that decision.
For sure, let's give you that opportunity to work with the plant to discern that. However, what I can tell you right now, because I talk to postal workers every day, is that things are not getting sorted. We also know how many machines were taken out. That's well documented in the public record. So we know two things, is that the folks that work inside the postal station and the letter carriers are seeing the backlog. And it would be largely prevented by sorting machines. There is no question about that. So what I'm saying is that what I would like you to do is engage with your plant and understand, because they have those metrics, because I know they do, and ask them, how could we benefit from having more productivity from our machines? And the answer is to reinstate those machines Mr. DeJoy had taken out. So that's what we're asking you to discern and put in the record for us. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just ask a final question. I have not used my 5 minutes yet, but I have interrupted now and then. Listening to this whole hearing, one thing that really struck me as extraordinary, Mr. Morgan, was that the Postmaster General of Chicago was pleading with his own employees to come back to work and work. What is the adjudication of people who are under contract to work, namely an employment agreement, who don't show up for work?
We have a collective bargain agreement. So what I would say is that it's not the union's job to address attendance. I would appreciate the union's efforts in promoting being regular in attendance, a public statement to draw those who are at home to come back to work. It's our job, again, as I stated earlier, we have a collective bargain agreement.
I understand.
The
To what do you
polices that.
attribute the fact that they're not coming to work?
That's the million-dollar question. I would
Do
love
you
to
know,
know
Mr.
that.
Julian?
I don't think it's simply a matter of people who are not coming back to work. I think it's a matter of not having enough. I've been in the Postal Service for 24 years.
Not having enough what?
Not having enough employees, because we've been in the Postal Service for 24 years, and there's one provision that will get you removed from the Postal Service, and that's failure to maintain regular attendance. We tell this of new hires, 2 quick ways to get out the door: take something that's not yours and failure to maintain regular attendance. Now it's incumbent upon management to enforce that.
Exactly. I mean, I understand a collective bargaining agreement. I understand consulting with the union. But you just heard from the union saying, hey, if you don't show up to work, that's a great way to be shown the door by management, and management needs to enforce that. Are you prepared to do that, Mr. Morgan?
Absolutely. We're currently, Chairman Connolly, I have an attendance team, 3 dedicated specialists that does nothing but address attendance for me.
Okay. All right. Well, I thank you all. For the record, and I think Mr. Rush, I want to insert into the record several reports. The audit report on mail delivery and customer service issues in select stations here in Chicago. Operational changes to mail delivery, also an Inspector General report. The nationwide service performance report of the Inspector General. And finally, the service performance first class single piece letter mail. For the record, I ask unanimous consent that they be entered into the record without objection. So ordered.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Mr.
hold on.
Chair?
Hold on. Is that Mr. Foster?
It is indeed.
It is. I'm just about to recognize you, Mr. Foster. I was buying you some time. Our final questioner in this hearing is Mr. Bill Foster, Congressman from the great state of Illinois. Mr. Foster, you are recognized for your 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to our witnesses. I really appreciate it. And I guess I have a sort of hyper-local question. In my district, especially in Woodridge, Illinois, we've had huge numbers of reports of very severe mail delivery from residents who live east of Route 53. But the answer we get back in what appears to be a fairly local concern is that we just are, chronic understaffing problems, which is, we've been talking about a lot in this hearing. And so, my questions, when you look at the job market today, And the fact that record numbers of people are quitting all of their jobs. And then if you say, what are the reasons people are quitting, is they just don't find it rewarding. You know, so many of us spend so much time scowling at screens these days instead of feeling like we're doing real work. And you know, maybe I always, whenever I see postal delivery personnel, they're smiling. And I was just wondering, have you had any success just saying that this is actually a rewarding job instead of getting into, you know, all of the different ways that you're trying to be competitive? Do you find that this is actually seen the way I think it's felt by postal workers as being a job where you're really doing something important for society? Does that work? You know, Mr. Julian, Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, absolutely. As I stated earlier, you know, we do indeed have an absolute love for the Postal Service. That's why we're here. That's why we raise concerns about the service issues. And I do want to take the opportunity to, I know there has been some critique of the FO leave and that which was passed by Congress as a reason for poor mail service. I want to thank you on behalf of the letter carriers and postal workers, because COVID is real. It was real then and it's real now. And some of our members had to utilize that, and we would have really appreciate what you were trying to do with the HEROES Act in terms of the hazard pay. And maybe there's funds still left over that you can consider that. But no, we definitely appreciate the mission for which we were sworn, and that's delivering mail. We love our jobs.
Yeah, and there's one thing I think that all Americans should understand is that when they see a postal delivery worker, smile and wave and just let them know that you really appreciate the Postal Service. Yes. Because this is a deeply non-scientific question, and it doesn't have to do with contract terms or all the things you normally wrestle with. But you know, it's an important part. And so, and then specifically, are you addressing the recruiting and training people from the point of view of the VER, the voluntary early retirement option in place, and what's the resulting impact of that? And did that have a significant direct effect on the shortage?
Are you asking that locally?
Oh, well, locally and globally both.
I can't speak. I can't speak globally, sir, but locally, the VER did not have a drastic impact on our staffing. No, it did not.
Okay, so it's not like in many businesses, there are just large numbers of people who've been counting the days until you know, they can retire and are now leaping at it. So it's not it. Okay, well, anyway, I just really appreciate your attending to this issue. It's a big deal for the people we represent, and thank you all, and I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Foster. And just following up on what you just said, I think it's important to note that in that HEROES Act we talked about, Congress, in fact, had provided, I think, $25 billion for postal relief, for an injection of liquidity and to try to help out in extraordinary costs during a pandemic, including overtime and other things. And that actually got into the draft final of the bill. And then Secretary Mnuchin went to President Trump, and President Trump threatened to veto the entire bill over this item. He wanted no relief to the Postal Service. And so the only relief in almost $6 trillion of COVID-related appropriations was a $10 billion loan that we finally converted into a grant. A loan that originally, because of the terms Steve Mnuchin, the Secretary of Treasury, set were so unacceptable to the Postal Service, they couldn't use it. And here we are talking about how beloved the Postal Service is. We bailed out the cruise industry, we bailed out the airline industry, on, but we certainly did not bail out the Postal Service. And that's why postal reform is so important right now, because it's the only mechanism for direct relief that is so badly needed. You have a unanimous consent request, Ms. Schakowsky, for the record?
Yes, I would like to insert in the record, I think it's good to have these individuals inserted into the record on their comments and their concerns. And there are also a couple of elected officials, including Deborah Silverstein, that have asked to be included in the record.
Without
Thank you.
objection, it is so ordered. The chair would also add 2 statements for the record from the National Newspaper Association. Mr. Davis?
Ask unanimous consent to insert into the record letters from constituents.
Without objection, it is so ordered. Is there anything else for the record? Seeing and hearing none, without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials and to submit additional written questions for the witnesses through and to the chair, which will then be what's that?
Oh, I do.
Sorry.
Can I just say?
Which will be forwarded to the witnesses for response.
It was Deborah Silverstein and 2 aldermen and Maria Haddon. I wanted to say their
Okay.
names. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. I also want to thank my colleagues, especially from the Chicago area. I can't think of a field hearing that's had this kind of attendance and interest and commitment. I think it really does speak volumes about how critical this issue is, Mr. Morgan, for you and your colleagues, and also how important it is to the people who live here. And I know you know that. And I sense you're committed to trying to make that better for them. But we cannot settle for lower standards and then charge higher prices. We have to get performance back up to where it was. The American people deserve no less. And during a pandemic, it's about life and death in some cases. So this is serious business. And that's why we had this hearing and why it got so much very high level participation and interest. So with that, I thank our witnesses for being here today. And this hearing is adjourned.